He just wanted to buy his mom a gift. Then Chuck Norris walked in and changed everything. Welcome to Chuck Norris Heroics. Let's uncover what really happened. The gentle chime of a small bell above the entrance of the Gilded Sparrow, a quaint antique and gift shop nestled on a cobblestone side street, announced young Leo's arrival. He was a boy of perhaps 9 years, with earnest brown eyes that seemed to absorb the world with a quiet intensity and a scattering of freckles across the bridge of his nose that spoke of summer days spent outdoors. In his small, slightly grubby hand, he clutched a fistful of carefully saved coins and a few crumpled bills, the sum total of weeks of small chores, found pennies, and foregone ice creams. His mission today was one of profound importance, at least in his young world. To purchase a birthday gift for his mother, a woman who worked tirelessly as a night nurse, and whose smiles, though frequent, often seemed tinged with a weariness Leo longed to erase, if only for a day. The shop was a treasure trove of a bygone era, its narrow aisles crammed with an eclectic mix of curiosities. Sunlight, fractured by the leaded glass of the bay window, cast dancing patterns on dusty porcelain figurines, tarnished silver lockets, and stacks of leather-bound books that smelled faintly of vanilla and old paper. Leo navigated the cluttered space with a careful reverence, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and a slight trepidation, as if he had stepped into a wizard's secret study. He had visited the Gilded Sparrow once before, a fleeting visit with his grandmother, and one particular item had captured his imagination, lodging itself firmly in his memory. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a sparrow, nestled within a delicate glass dome. When a tiny key at its base was wound, the bird would flutter its wings almost imperceptibly, and a faint, tinkling melody would fill the air, a tune his mother used to hum when he was very small, a half-forgotten lullaby. He had dreamt of giving it to her ever since. Near the back of the shop, seated in a worn velvet armchair almost hidden behind a tall display case filled with antique teacups, an older gentleman was engrossed in a thick, leather-bound volume. His attire was simple, a tweed jacket that had seen better days, a neatly knotted, though slightly frayed, tie, and spectacles perched on the end of his nose. His silver hair was combed back from a high forehead, and his face, though lined, possessed a kindness in its contours, a gentle wisdom in the set of his eyes as they occasionally lifted from his book to observe the quiet comings and goings of the shop. He appeared to be a regular, a fixture, perhaps even the shop's unassuming owner, though he rarely interacted with customers unless approached. This was Mr. Alistair Hemlock, a man who had lived a life far richer and more varied than his current quietude might suggest, a life that had taught him the profound value of small kindnesses and the often unseen struggles of the human heart. He noticed Leo enter, noted the careful way the boy clutched his money, the earnest determination in his young face, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips before he returned to his reading, though a part of his attention remained with the small, serious shopper. Leo finally found it, displayed on a high shelf towards the back, nestled amongst other delicate ornaments. The glass dome gleamed softly in the dim light, the little wooden sparrow within seemingly poised for flight. His heart gave a small leap. It was even more beautiful than he remembered. He reached up on tiptoe, his small fingers just brushing the cool glass, but it was too high. He looked around for assistance, his gaze falling upon a stern-looking woman with severely pinned-up gray hair and spectacles that magnified her already sharp eyes, who was meticulously dusting a nearby cabinet. This was Mrs. Periwinkle, the shop's longtime manager, a woman whose efficiency was matched only by her often brisk demeanor and a thinly veiled impatience for anything that disrupted her carefully ordered domain. Leo took a deep breath, mustering his courage. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice small but clear. Mrs. Periwinkle turned, her expression one of mild annoyance at being interrupted. "Yes," she said, her tone as crisp as starched linen. Leo pointed towards the high shelf. That little bird in the glass dome, ma'am. Could I see it, please?" He could feel the weight of the coins in his sweaty palm, a small, hopeful anchor. The fate of his mother's birthday surprise now rested in the hands of this formidable woman. Mrs. Periwinkle's sharp eyes followed Leo's pointing finger, her gaze settling on the glass-domed sparrow with a distinct lack of enthusiasm. "That one," she said, her voice flat, conveying neither interest nor encouragement. "It's quite delicate, you know, and not inexpensive." She didn't make a move towards it, her posture remaining stiff, her duster held like a scepter. Leo clutched his money tighter, his hope faltering slightly under her dismissive scrutiny. I know it might be, ma'am," he stammered, "but I've been saving. It's for my mother's birthday. It's very special." He hoped the mention of his mother, of a birthday, might soften her demeanor, might evoke a sliver of empathetic understanding. Mrs. Periwinkle, however, seemed unmoved. She gave a small, almost imperceptible sniff. "Birthdays," she muttered, as if the very concept were a minor irritation. "Children always want the most impractical things. And usually," she added, her gaze flicking pointedly towards Leo's small, clutched fist, "they haven't the faintest idea of true value." The implication was clear, and it stung Leo more than an outright refusal might have. He felt his cheeks grow warm. He wasn't just a child. He was a child who, in her eyes, was likely incapable of affording or even appreciating such a delicate item. "I do have money, ma'am," he said, his voice a little stronger now, a defensive edge creeping in. He held out his hand, displaying the crumpled bills and the collection of coins. "I've counted it. I think it might be enough." Mrs. Periwinkle barely glanced at the offered money. Her attention was already drifting back to the cabinet she had been dusting, her interest in Leo and his quest clearly waning. "The price is marked, young man," she said dismissively, turning away slightly. "It's on a small tag at the back. You'll need to be able to reach it to see it, I suppose. And do be careful. Breakages must be paid for, regardless of intentions." Her words, though not overtly cruel, were laden with a chilling indifference, a complete lack of warmth or assistance. She had effectively dismissed him, leaving him to struggle with the out-of-reach item, the price a mystery, and the implicit accusation of potential clumsiness hanging in the air. From his quiet corner, Mr. Hemlock observed this exchange, his reading momentarily forgotten. He saw the hope in Leo's eyes dim, replaced by a flicker of hurt and frustration. He noted Mrs. Periwinkle's brusque, uncaring manner, a familiar pattern he had witnessed many times, though rarely directed with such dismissiveness towards child. He frowned slightly, a crease appearing between his silver brows. He believed that a shop like the Gilded Sparrow, a place ostensibly dedicated to beauty and sentiment, should be a haven of kindness, not a bastion of cold indifference. Leo looked up at the high shelf again, his heart sinking. The glass dome seemed even further away now, almost impossibly out of reach. He could try to find a stool, perhaps, but the aisles were narrow, cluttered with fragile items, and Mrs. Periwinkle's warning about breakages echoed in his ears. He felt a knot of disappointment tighten in his stomach. He had been so sure, so hopeful. Now, his carefully saved money felt like a useless weight in his hand. He looked around the shop, a sense of defeat beginning to creep in. Perhaps he should just leave, find something else, something easier, something less delicate. But the image of the little sparrow, the thought of the tinkling lullaby, of his mother's surprised, hopefully joyous smile, held him rooted to the spot. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Leo, his determination momentarily overshadowing his disappointment, scanned the cluttered shop for anything that might serve as a makeshift step. His eyes landed on a stack of old, leather-bound ledgers piled precariously near a grandfather clock whose pendulum hung still and silent. They looked sturdy enough, perhaps. He glanced towards Mrs. Periwinkle, who was now engrossed in rearranging a display of silver thimbles, her back pointedly towards him. Taking a deep breath, Leo tiptoed towards the ledgers. He carefully, quietly, tried to slide the topmost one free, intending to use it to give him the few extra inches he needed. But the ledgers were heavier than they looked, and their bindings were slick with age. As he tugged, the entire stack wobbled precariously. For a terrifying moment, Leo thought they were going to topple, bringing a cascade of antiques crashing down with them. He froze, his heart pounding, managing to steady the stack just in time. He let out a shaky breath, his earlier resolve now tinged with a fresh wave of anxiety. Mrs. Periwinkle, alerted by some sixth sense for potential shop floor disasters, or perhaps by the faint rustle of the old books, turned sharply. Her eyes, magnified by her spectacles, narrowed into slits as she saw Leo near the ledgers. "Young man," she snapped, her voice like the crack of a whip. "What do you think you are doing? Get away from those books immediately. They are valuable first editions, not your personal climbing equipment." Her voice, though not excessively loud, was sharp enough to draw the attention of the few other customers in the shop, an elderly couple admiring a porcelain doll, and a young woman browsing through a rack of vintage postcards. They all turned to look, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and mild disapproval directed at the small boy who was clearly causing a disturbance. Leo recoiled as if struck, his face flaming with embarrassment. I'm sorry, ma'am," he stammered, backing away from the ledgers. "I was just trying to reach the little bird. You said the price tag was on the back." Mrs. Periwinkle marched towards him, her duster now wielded like a weapon of judgment. "I said the price was marked," she corrected him icily. "I did not give you permission to dismantle my shop in your attempts to ascertain it. If an item is out of your reach, then perhaps it is also out of your league." The deliberate pause, the pointed emphasis, was not lost on Leo, nor on the other listening customers. It was a thinly veiled insult, questioning not just his ability to reach, but his suitability as a patron, his capacity to afford such an item. The elderly couple exchanged a sympathetic glance, but said nothing. The young woman with the postcards frowned and turned back to her browsing, though her interest seemed faint. Mr. Hemlock, from his velvet armchair, observed the escalating situation with a growing sense of disquiet. He saw the genuine distress in Leo's eyes, the boy's small shoulders slumping under the weight of Mrs. Periwinkle's scorn. He saw the manager's unnecessary harshness, her complete lack of empathy or even basic courtesy towards a child. This was no longer about shop policy. It was about a fundamental lack of kindness. Leo stood rooted to the spot, his earlier determination now completely extinguished, replaced by a miserable sense of shame and defeat. He looked down at the coins and crumpled bills in his hand, the money that had represented so much hope and effort now feeling like a symbol of his inadequacy. He wanted to disappear, to run out of the shop and never return. The beautiful little sparrow in its glass dome now seemed impossibly distant, a dream he had been foolish to entertain. The tinkling lullaby he had imagined filling his mother's room on her birthday now sounded only in his mind, a mournful, fading echo. Mrs. Periwinkle, seemingly satisfied that she had thoroughly quashed Leo's aspirations and restored order to her domain, gave a curt, dismissive sniff and turned back towards her thimbles. "If you're not going to make a sensible purchase, young man," she said over her shoulder, her voice dripping with disdain, "then I suggest you find somewhere else to dawdle. This is a place of business, not a playground." Leo felt a lump form in his throat. His eyes stung. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to say that he wasn't dawdling, that he had saved his money, that his intentions were good. But the words wouldn't come. He was just a small boy, and she was a formidable, unyielding adult. The power imbalance was too great. He looked one last time towards the high shelf where the glass-domed sparrow sat, a tiny, perfect beacon of a hope that was now rapidly fading. He imagined his mother's face, the smile he had so longed to see, and a fresh wave of misery washed over him. Perhaps Mrs. Periwinkle was right. Perhaps it was an impractical thing. Perhaps he had been foolish. With a heavy heart, he began to turn towards the entrance, the little bell above the door now seeming to mock him with the promise of escape from this place of crushed dreams. He clutched his money tightly, the coins digging into his palm, a painful reminder of his failed mission. Just as he was about to take his first step towards the door, a quiet, calm voice, a voice that seemed to carry a different kind of authority altogether, broke the tense silence. "Excuse me, Mrs. Periwinkle." All heads, including Leo's, turned towards the back of the shop. Mr. Alistair Hemlock had risen from his velvet armchair. He had placed his leather-bound book carefully on the small side table, his spectacles removed and tucked into his jacket pocket. He stood there, not imposing in stature, but possessing a quiet dignity, a centered stillness that immediately commanded attention. His gaze, though gentle, was firm as it rested on the shop manager. Mrs. Periwinkle, startled by this unexpected intervention from the usually silent old gentleman she had long regarded as a harmless, if somewhat eccentric, fixture, turned, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Mr. Hemlock," she said, her tone a shade less imperious than before. "Is there something I can assist you with?" "Perhaps," Mr. Hemlock replied, his voice even and polite. "But first, I believe there is something we can assist this young gentleman with." He gestured subtly towards Leo, who stood frozen, wide-eyed, caught between his desire to flee and a sudden, inexplicable flicker of renewed hope. Mr. Hemlock then began to walk slowly towards the front of the shop, his movements unhurried, his gaze thoughtful. He did not look like a warrior preparing for battle, but rather like a scholar about to unravel a complex problem, or perhaps a gardener tending to a bruised and neglected sapling. The other customers watched with undisguised interest. The atmosphere in the Gilded Sparrow had shifted once again. The focus was no longer on a troublesome child, but on the unfolding interaction between the stern shop manager and this quiet, unassuming man who had suddenly, unexpectedly, stepped out of the shadows. Leo watched him approach, his heart thumping a strange rhythm of fear and a desperate, fragile hope. He didn't know who Mr. Hemlock was, or why he was intervening, but for the first time since entering the shop, he felt a tiny sliver of warmth, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, he was not entirely alone in his quest. Mrs. Periwinkle drew herself up, her back ramrod straight, clearly affronted by Mr. Hemlock's unexpected advocacy for the boy. "Mr. Hemlock," she said, her voice regaining its frosty edge, "while I appreciate your concern, this is a matter of shop policy and, frankly, common sense." The child was being disruptive, attempting to climb on valuable merchandise. "And," she added, her gaze flicking dismissively towards Leo's clutched fist, "it is highly unlikely he possesses the means to purchase one of our more exclusive items." Mr. Hemlock stopped a few feet from her, his expression still calm, almost serene. "Shop policy, Mrs. Periwinkle," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "should always be tempered with compassion. And common sense should tell us that the dreams of a child, especially one wishing to honor his mother, are rarely disruptive. They are, in fact, rather precious." He then turned his gaze to Leo, offering the boy a small, reassuring smile. "Young man," he said, his voice kind, "you were interested in the little sparrow in the glass dome, I believe? The one that plays a melody." Leo, startled to be addressed so directly and with such unexpected kindness, could only nod, his eyes wide. "Yes, sir," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Hemlock then looked up at the high shelf. "It is rather high, isn't it?" he mused, more to himself than to anyone else. He then looked back at Mrs. Periwinkle. "Perhaps, madam, if you are otherwise occupied with your thimbles, I might be permitted to assist this young customer in ascertaining the price." His tone was impeccably polite, yet there was an underlying current of gentle but firm challenge that Mrs. Periwinkle could not ignore. She hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to having her authority so quietly but effectively questioned. She glanced from Mr. Hemlock's calm, expectant face to Leo's hopeful one, then to the other customers who were now watching the exchange with undisguised interest. She was, for once, at a loss for a sharp retort. "Well, she began, then faltered. Mr. Hemlock didn't wait for her to formulate a refusal. With a surprising agility for a man of his years, he reached for a small, sturdy wooden stool that was tucked away beneath a display table. He positioned it carefully, then, with another reassuring glance at Leo, he stepped onto it. He easily reached the glass-domed sparrow, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he lifted it from the shelf. He examined the small price tag on its base, his expression unreadable. Leo watched, his heart pounding, his breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment of truth. Was his saved-up money enough? Would his dream be realized or shattered? Mrs. Periwinkle stood stiffly, her arms crossed, her face a mask of disapproving silence. She clearly resented this interference, this undermining of her authority, but she seemed, for the moment, unwilling or unable to stop it. The quiet determination of Mr. Hemlock, his refusal to be dismissed, had created a new dynamic in the shop, one where her usual tactics of intimidation and disdain were proving ineffective. The little sparrow, now at eye level, seemed even more beautiful, its delicate craftsmanship more apparent. The anticipation was almost unbearable for Leo. Mr. Hemlock stepped down from the stool with the same unhurried grace, the glass dome held carefully in his hands. He turned to Leo, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It is indeed a lovely piece," he said, his voice gentle. "And the price," he paused, his eyes twinkling almost imperceptibly, "is considerable. As you suspected, it requires a keen appreciation for its artistry." He didn't name the sum immediately, instead allowing the weight of its potential cost to settle. Leo's heart sank a little. Considerable was not the word he had hoped to hear. He looked down at his small hoard of money, the coins suddenly feeling very few, the crumpled bills very thin. Mrs. Periwinkle, sensing an opportunity to reassert her authority and perhaps to vindicate her earlier judgment, interjected, "As I said, Mr. Hemlock, some items are simply beyond certain budgets. It's a matter of practicality." Her tone was sharp, directed more at the old gentleman than at the boy. Mr. Hemlock, however, did not look at her. His gaze remained on Leo, a look of understanding and quiet empathy in his eyes. "Practicality, Mrs. Periwinkle," he said without turning, "is often the enemy of dreams. And sometimes," he continued, now looking directly at Leo, "the true value of a gift is not measured in the coins it costs, but in the love with which it is chosen and the joy it is intended to bring." He then turned the glass dome slightly, allowing the light to catch the intricately carved feathers of the wooden sparrow. "Your mother, young man," Mr. Hemlock said softly, "must be a very special woman for you to have set your heart on such a unique and thoughtful present." Leo's eyes, which had been downcast, lifted. He nodded shyly. "She is, sir," he whispered. "She works very hard. And that song, the one the bird plays, she used to sing it to me." A wave of emotion washed over Leo, a mixture of love for his mother, his desperate desire to give her this perfect gift, and the crushing fear that it was about to slip through his fingers. He felt his eyes begin to sting again. Mr. Hemlock saw the boy's distress, the unshed tears glistening in his young eyes. He also saw Mrs. Periwinkle's impatient, almost triumphant smirk, as if Leo's inability to afford the item was a personal victory for her. It was this, perhaps, more than anything else, the manager's cold, unfeeling satisfaction at a child's disappointment, that solidified Mr. Hemlock's resolve. He turned back to Leo, his voice kind but firm. "Leo," he said, using the boy's name for the first time, though Leo had no idea how he knew it. "Why don't you show me the money you've saved? Let's see what we're working with." His tone was encouraging, as if they were partners in this endeavor. Hesitantly, Leo opened his small fist and held out his collection of coins and bills. It wasn't much, he knew, probably not nearly enough for something so considerable. He felt a fresh wave of embarrassment, expecting Mr. Hemlock to confirm his fears, to perhaps gently suggest he choose something more practical. Mrs. Periwinkle watched, her arms still crossed, a look of smug vindication on her face. She was clearly anticipating the moment when the boy's meager savings would be revealed as laughably insufficient. The other customers, too, seemed to be holding their breath, caught up in this small, poignant drama. Mr. Hemlock, however, did not scoff. He did not look dismissive. He regarded the small pile of money with a seriousness that afforded it a dignity it perhaps didn't objectively possess. He then looked back at the glass-domed sparrow in his other hand, a thoughtful, almost calculating expression on his face. The silence in the Gilded Sparrow was absolute, broken only by the faint ticking of a distant grandfather clock that had, apparently, decided to resume its duties. Mr. Hemlock carefully placed the glass-domed sparrow on a nearby velvet-lined display counter, its delicate form now the focal point of the hushed shop. He then turned his full attention to the small pile of money in Leo's outstretched hand. With a gentle reverence that surprised Leo, Mr. Hemlock took the coins and bills, his weathered fingers surprisingly nimble as he began to count them. Not with the brisk efficiency of a bank teller, but with the thoughtful deliberation of a scholar examining ancient currency. Leo watched, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could feel Mrs. Periwinkle's sharp, judgmental gaze on him, could sense her silent, impatient expectation of his inevitable failure. He tried to swallow the lump that had formed in his throat, his earlier hope now dwindling to a tiny, flickering ember. The coins clinked softly as Mr. Hemlock separated them into small piles, pennies, nickels, dimes, a few quarters. The crumpled bills were smoothed out with a careful hand. The process seemed to take an eternity. The elderly couple who had been admiring the porcelain doll had now moved closer, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. The young woman with the postcards had abandoned her pretense of browsing and was openly watching, her arms crossed, a frown of concern on her face. "Well now," Mr. Hemlock finally said, his voice thoughtful, breaking the silence. He looked from the counted money to the glass dome, then back to Leo, a peculiar, almost inscrutable expression in his eyes. "It seems, young man, that you have saved quite diligently." His choice of words was careful, neutral, offering no immediate clue as to the outcome. Leo held his breath. Mrs. Periwinkle shifted impatiently, her foot tapping a silent, rhythmic beat on the polished wooden floor. Is it enough, sir?" Leo finally managed to whisper, the question fraught with all his hopes and fears. Mr. Hemlock paused, his gaze meeting Leo's directly. For a moment, Leo thought he saw a flicker of something akin to sadness in the old gentleman's eyes, and his heart sank. This was it, the confirmation of his failure. But then, Mr. Hemlock's expression shifted, a slow, gentle smile beginning to spread across his face, a smile that seemed to crinkle the corners of his eyes and radiate a surprising warmth. "Enough," Mr. Hemlock repeated softly. He then turned his gaze towards Mrs. Periwinkle, who was watching with an air of smug anticipation, clearly expecting him to deliver the disappointing news to the boy. "Mrs. Periwinkle," Mr. Hemlock said, his voice still quiet but now carrying a new note, a subtle undercurrent of authority that made the shop manager unconsciously straighten her already ramrod-straight posture. "It appears we have a most remarkable coincidence here today." Mrs. Periwinkle raised a skeptical eyebrow. "A coincidence, Mr. Hemlock?" "Indeed," he replied, his smile widening almost imperceptibly. He picked up the small pile of counted money. "It seems that young Leo here, through his commendable efforts and dedicated saving, has managed to accumulate the exact amount required for this very special sparrow." He held up the money with a slight flourish, as if presenting evidence in a court of law. A collective gasp, soft but audible, rippled through the onlookers. Leo stared, his eyes wide with disbelief, his mouth slightly agape. Could it be true? Had he actually saved enough? It seemed impossible. Mrs. Periwinkle looked utterly dumbfounded, her face a mask of incredulity. "The exact amount," she sputtered, her composure momentarily deserting her. But that piece is priced at—" Mr. Hemlock cut her off smoothly, his voice still gentle, but now imbued with an unshakable firmness. "The price, Mrs. Periwinkle," he said, his eyes twinkling, "as we both know, can sometimes be subject to momentary and very special collector's discounts, especially when the purchaser demonstrates such profound dedication and the recipient is so clearly deserving." He then turned back to Leo, his smile now warm and unequivocal. "Congratulations, young man," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "It seems this beautiful sparrow was destined to be yours. Your mother is a very fortunate woman." He gestured towards a glass dome. "Shall we have Mrs. Periwinkle wrap it up for you?" The shop, which moments before had been a place of crushing disappointment for Leo, was now suddenly, miraculously, filled with an almost unbearable sense of joy and disbelief. The little wooden sparrow seemed to gleam even brighter under its glass dome, its tinkling lullaby almost audible in the triumphant silence. The stunned silence that followed Mr. Hemlock's pronouncement was broken by a hesitant, then more confident, smattering of applause from the elderly couple and the young woman with the postcards. Leo himself was speechless, his mind struggling to reconcile the crushing disappointment of moments before with this sudden, unbelievable turn of events. He looked from Mr. Hemlock's kind, smiling face to the pile of his own meager savings, then to the exquisite glass-domed sparrow, and finally to Mrs. Periwinkle, whose face was a study in thwarted disapproval and grudging disbelief. Mrs. Periwinkle opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly at a loss for words. The collector's discount was a fabrication, of course, a gentle but undeniable maneuvering by Mr. Hemlock, but she was in no position to challenge him, not with the other customers now beaming their approval and the old gentleman himself radiating such quiet, unshakable authority. She knew when she was outmaneuvered. With a stiff, reluctant nod, she muttered, "Very well, Mr. Hemlock. If you say so." Her tone suggested she very much did not say so, but she knew better than to argue further. Mr. Hemlock simply smiled benignly. "Excellent, Mrs. Periwinkle. I knew your good business sense would recognize a fortuitous alignment of customer dedication and product availability." He then turned to Leo, whose face was now alight with a joy so pure it was almost painful to behold. "Now, young man," Mr. Hemlock said, his voice warm, "since this is such a special occasion, I believe this gift deserves the finest wrapping the Gilded Sparrow has to offer. Don't you agree?" Leo, finally finding his voice, could only manage a choked, "Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir. Thank you." Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude and happiness. Mrs. Periwinkle, with a sigh that clearly conveyed her long-suffering martyrdom, moved toward the back counter where rolls of wrapping paper and spools of ribbon were kept. Her movements were brisk, efficient, but lacking any semblance of warmth or pleasure in the transaction. She selected a rather plain, beige paper, clearly intending to expend the minimum possible effort. Mr. Hemlock, however, gently intervened. "Ah, Mrs. Periwinkle," he said, his voice still mild but with an underlying note of polite insistence. "Perhaps that rather lovely silver paper with the blue velvet ribbon? The one you reserve for your most discerning clientele? I feel it will be most appropriate for a gift chosen with such heart." Mrs. Periwinkle shot him a look that could have curdled milk, but she grudgingly exchanged the plain paper for the more opulent silver roll. As she began to wrap the glass dome, her movements still stiff and resentful, Mr. Hemlock engaged Leo in quiet conversation, asking him about his mother, about her upcoming birthday, his gentle questions drawing out the boy's shy but enthusiastic responses. He learned of her long hours at the hospital, her love for gardening, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she truly smiled. He listened patiently, his expression one of genuine interest, making Leo feel as though his small, personal story was the most important thing in the world. The other customers, their earlier errands forgotten, lingered, content to witness this small, heartwarming drama unfold to its conclusion. The atmosphere in the shop had been transformed from one of cold, dismissive commercialism to one of unexpected warmth and shared humanity. The little wooden sparrow, now being carefully encased in shimmering silver paper, had become more than just a gift. It was a symbol of perseverance, of kindness, and of the quiet, unassuming power of one person to make a profound difference in the life of another. When Mrs. Periwinkle finally, and with ill-concealed reluctance, handed the beautifully wrapped package to Leo, her thin lips pressed into a moue of disapproval, Leo's face was a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. He clutched the gift to his chest as if it were the most precious treasure in the world, his earlier despair completely forgotten, replaced by an overwhelming sense of triumph and gratitude. He looked up at Mr. Hemlock, his eyes shining. I don't know how to thank you, sir," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. Hemlock simply smiled and placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "The best thanks you can give, Leo," he said softly, "is to see the joy on your mother's face when she opens her gift. That, I assure you, will be thanks enough for everyone." With the precious silver-wrapped package clutched tightly in his hands, Leo felt as if he were floating. The earlier anxieties, the sting of Mrs. Periwinkle's scorn, had all but vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of joy and a profound gratitude towards the kind old gentleman who had so unexpectedly championed his cause. He looked up at Mr. Hemlock, his young face alight with an emotion too deep for words. Mr. Hemlock simply met his gaze with a warm, understanding smile, a silent acknowledgement of the shared victory. "You run along now, Leo," Mr. Hemlock said gently. "Your mother is waiting for her beautiful surprise." He gave the boy's shoulder a final, encouraging pat. Leo nodded, his heart full. He turned to Mrs. Periwinkle, who was now meticulously rearranging a display of antique letter openers, pointedly ignoring them both. "Thank you, ma'am," Leo said, his voice polite and sincere, despite her earlier harshness. Mrs. Periwinkle merely grunted in response, not even bothering to look up. It didn't matter. Leo's happiness was too expansive to be dampened by her continued disapproval. He then looked at the elderly couple and the young woman, who were all smiling at him. "Thank you," he said to them too, a general expression of gratitude for their silent support. They murmured encouraging replies, their faces reflecting the warmth of the moment. With one last, grateful look at Mr. Hemlock, Leo turned and practically skipped towards the entrance, his steps light, his spirits soaring. The little bell above the door chimed merrily as he exited, its sound now a triumphant peal rather than a melancholy signal of defeat. As Leo disappeared down the cobblestone street, his small figure radiating an infectious joy, Mr. Hemlock turned his attention back to Mrs. Periwinkle. The shop manager had finished with the letter openers and was now vigorously polishing an already gleaming silver teapot, her movements sharp and agitated. "Well, Mrs. Periwinkle," Mr. Hemlock said, his voice still calm and even, "that was a most satisfactory transaction. Wouldn't you agree?" Mrs. Periwinkle slammed the teapot down on the counter with a little more force than necessary. "Satisfactory for some, perhaps, Mr. Hemlock," she retorted, her voice tight with resentment. "Though I fail to see the business sense in practically giving away one of our premium items due to some momentary collector's discount that I was entirely unaware of." Mr. Hemlock chuckled softly, a dry, rustling sound. "Ah, but my dear Mrs. Periwinkle," he said, his eyes twinkling, "you are looking at it merely as a matter of commerce. I prefer to see it as an investment." "An investment?" she scoffed. "An investment in what, pray tell? Goodwill? Sentimentality? Those don't pay the rent, Mr. Hemlock." "Perhaps not directly," he conceded, "but an investment in kindness, in fostering a child's love for his mother, in demonstrating that even in a world that can often seem cold and indifferent, small acts of generosity can still flourish well. I find those to be investments of incalculable value. Their returns," he added, his gaze thoughtful, "are not always measured in pounds and pence, but in the warmth they generate, in the hope they inspire. And that, my dear Mrs. Periwinkle, is a currency far more precious than any other." Mrs. Periwinkle merely sniffed, unconvinced, but she offered no further argument. She knew, from long experience, that arguing with Mr. Hemlock when he was in one Ophi's philosophical moods was a fruitless endeavor. She returned to her polishing, though her movements were perhaps a fraction less aggressive than before. The elderly couple, who had overheard the exchange, approached Mr. Hemlock. "That was a wonderful thing you did, sir," the old woman said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "A truly wonderful thing." Her husband nodded in agreement. "Restores your faith, it does," he added gruffly, though his eyes were kind. Mr. Hemlock simply smiled. The young man did all the hard work, he said. He saved his money. He held on to his dream. All I did was facilitate a slightly more favorable exchange rate. He then bid them a polite good day and returned to his velvet armchair in the corner, picking up his leather-bound volume as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But the Gilded Sparrow and all who had been within its walls that afternoon were subtly changed. A little bit of magic, not the kind found in dusty old books, but the real, potent magic of human kindness, had been at work, leaving behind a warmth that lingered long after the silver-wrapped sparrow had flown from its shelves. The Gilded Sparrow gradually returned to its usual quiet rhythm as the afternoon waned. The elderly couple completed their purchase of a small porcelain shepherdess, their transaction handled by Mrs. Periwinkle with a slightly less frosty demeanor than usual, though whether this was a result of Mr. Hemlock's intervention or simply the lateness of the hour was debatable. The young woman bought a handful of vintage postcards and departed with a thoughtful smile. Mr. Hemlock remained in his armchair, the leather-bound volume open in his lap, though his gaze often drifted towards the window, watching the play of light and shadow on the cobblestones outside. He wasn't reading, not really. He was reflecting on the small drama that had unfolded, on young Leo's earnest face, on the transformative power of a simple act of generosity. He knew that the collector's discount he had so deftly invoked would come from his own pocket. He would settle the difference with Mrs. Periwinkle later, discreetly, as he often did when he felt an injustice, however small, needed rectifying. It was a quiet philanthropy he practiced, unseen and unacknowledged, born from a lifetime of understanding that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in the capacity to ease another's burden, to nurture a flicker of hope. He thought of the little wooden sparrow, now on its way to becoming a cherished birthday treasure. He imagined Leo presenting it to his mother, the boy's face alight with pride and love. He pictured the mother's surprise, her smile, the gentle, tinkling melody of the forgotten lullaby filling her room, a sound that would now forever be intertwined with the memory of her son's devotion and a stranger's unexpected kindness. These were the returns Mr. Hemlock valued, the dividends that enriched the spirit. Mrs. Periwinkle, for her part, continued her duties with her customary efficiency, though a certain restlessness seemed to cling to her. She found herself glancing towards the high shelf where the glass-domed sparrow had once sat, the empty space now a silent testament to the afternoon's unusual events. She would never admit it, not even to herself, but a tiny, unaccustomed warmth had pricked at the edges of her carefully guarded cynicism. The boy's joy, however irritatingly facilitated by Mr. Hemlock's interference, had been undeniably real, almost infectious. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to be said for sentiment after all. As the shop prepared to close, and the last rays of the setting sun cast a golden glow through the front window, Mr. Hemlock finally rose from his chair. He approached the counter where Mrs. Periwinkle was tallying the day's meager receipts. "A good day, Mrs. Periwinkle?" he inquired politely. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "An eventful one, Mr. Hemlock," she conceded. He smiled faintly. "Indeed." He then placed a small, discreetly folded envelope on the counter. "For the sparrow," he said softly, to cover any discrepancies in the pricing. Before she could protest or even examine its contents, he bid her a good evening and, with a slight nod, made his way towards the door. The little bell above the entrance chimed softly as he stepped out into the cool evening air, leaving Mrs. Periwinkle alone in the quiet, treasure-filled shop, the scent of old paper, polished wood, and a lingering trace of something akin to hope, hanging in the air. The Gilded Sparrow, for all its accumulated dust and forgotten relics, had been a stage for a timeless story, a reminder that even in the most ordinary of settings, extraordinary moments of grace could, and often did, occur. And sometimes, all it took was one quiet observer, one gentle intervention, to change the ending for the better. Leo, meanwhile, was home. He had hidden the beautifully wrapped gift in the back of his closet, his heart still fluttering with excitement. His mother wouldn't be home from her hospital shift for several more hours, but he could hardly wait. He replayed the events at the Gilded Sparrow in his mind. Mr. Hemlock's kind eyes, his calm voice, the miraculous pronouncement of the exact amount. It felt like a fairy tale, a story he would treasure for the rest of his life. He knew, with a certainty that warmed him from the inside out, that this would be the best birthday his mother had ever had. And the little wooden sparrow, a symbol of his love and a stranger's profound kindness, would sing its sweet, tinkling lullaby for many years to come.